Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to wait a minute for people to trickle in, and then we will get started today. As you come in, you should see closed captioning enabled. You can also click out of that. If you have any questions as we go, put them in the Q&A, and we're going to save some time at the end to do that. And without further ado, we'll get going today because we got a lot of slides I want to get through. This presentation is scheduled for 1 hour. I'll get you out of here by 9 p.m. Eastern. And again, I hope to leave 5-10 minutes at least for questions at the very end. My name is Tal Kitron. I work with Applerouth Tutoring Services as a premium tutor, mostly doing test prep and executive function coach. Today, we're going to be talking about managing anxiety, both general and academic, and also testing anxiety. I'm speaking from the perspective of a tutor and teacher and coach and mentor. So kind of drawing upon those experiences and also from talking with colleagues, we're going to bring up research from others. A lot of the research is 5, 10, 15 years old, so we can expound upon that as we go, but still holds true today. And again, what Applerouth does is academic prep. So if you're struggling in school and you need support, we have tutors who do that. SAT, ACT, PSAT, which is my bread and butter, and then executive function coaching. So everyone knows the first few slides are just not going to be surprising, just a little bit discouraging, but don't worry, because we get more encouraging as the slides go on. Today's teens are definitely facing a ton of stressors. Working with sophomores mostly and juniors in high school, I can even see it not reading much between the lines. There's just so much going on, right? AP exams are approaching in May. There's extracurriculars, there's finals, and then, before you know it, finals again, right? So just being a high school student these days, it's stressful. And the problem is that, at least in my experience, most of my students just aren't getting enough sleep and just don't have that much time on their hands. So we have less time to rest, less time to play with our pets and play with our friends and go outside and do the things that really nourish our soul. Of course, social media is involved, right? And phones. There's a big focus on a reward system, right? Even with emails, right? One new message, but especially on social media platforms where there's just a lot of focus on external validation from peers and others. And performance in itself is tiring, and it can be stressful. It can be anxiety producing. So some of the next few slides are going to discuss Dr. Twenge's study, which really was involving high school students throughout from kind of freshman until senior year. And some of the numbers, again, this is 10-ish years ago, were pretty astounding. And I would say, if anything, these numbers have gotten a bit worse. So in the smartphone age, in the last 15, 20 years, 42% of teens, so around almost half, sleep less than 7 hours. And most of my students would laugh at me if I said 7 hours. They'd be like, I wish. Comparing 1991 to 2015, there was a 57% increase in teens who were sleep deprived. And then we have found that this relates to electronic devices, probably not surprising, right? And even for adults, like I know that I have this problem too. If we spend more than 3 hours a day on an electronic device, we are about 30% more likely to get less sleep. I mean, I've seen it from my own experience just in undergrad and grad school, and as in real life, right? That when our sleep suffers, it's hard to regulate our emotions. Sleep can be a big reset. Sometimes if we're just operating on none, we just can't get anything done. Like, you're going to try to prep for an AP exam or a final or an SAT on 2 hours of sleep. It's just not going to be productive. You won't retain the information. So sleep is, of course, a big one. And I mean, 3 hours is almost like that was the number on this slide, is more than 3 hours a day. But the average for high school seniors, and this is again probably 7, 8 years ago, so now it's even more, 6 hours of leisure time per day spent on a device, right? So a couple hours on the internet, a couple hours texting, maybe an hour or two gaming or using apps, and then FaceTime or video chatting for half an hour. So that's a ton of time. And obviously, not only are we sacrificing time, we could be doing something productive as far as work, but also something that's just going to, again, give us energy, right? Feed us, nourish us. For those who spent more than 5 hours plugged in or connected to a device, there was a 50% increase in likelihood of not sleeping enough. There were more suicide risk factors, anxiety and depression, et cetera, twice as likely to be just unhappy generally. And this is as compared to those who use devices for 1 hour or less. So, I mean, again, this isn't groundbreaking, but sleep and using devices less, those are going to be two things for pretty much anyone that are going to help. No matter what you're dealing with, if you're feeling stressed, anxious, depressed, like sleep is a reset, it is a cornerstone. And we are often giving a lot of our energy and emotions to these performances on social media or trying to get positive feedback from people. That mentions that we aren't seeing the slides, so let me know if that's still happening. Hopefully that has fixed it. And apologies if so, I can do a quick run back through. All we've really said so far is, again, sleep in the new age has suffered, right? We're spending a lot of time on video chat and just on the phone on devices. And so moving on, screen time as opposed to analog engagement, meaning like in-person interaction, is a big dichotomy, right? So like pretty much in this study, all non-screen activities, whether that was sleep, whether that was walking the dog, even just meditation or resting without looking at a TV or a screen, all those were linked to more happiness. On the other side, screen activities were all linked to more loneliness and less happiness, right? So that's a pretty straightforward divide. And I think a big part of it with the screen time is there's just this built-in comparison culture. So when we're performing, when we're putting things on social media, we're also trying to keep up with the other people that we're following, who are following us. And we've all seen that people often post the very positive side of things. It's rare that you see like the reality or the negatives, right? So like an Instagram picture that looks so casual but took hours to set up can create body issues. FOMO, of course, is a big thing, fear of missing out or feeling left out or less than. And again, just as we introduce how prevalent this is, in a given year, some 40 million adults, this was, again, many years ago, so now it's more, but will have an anxiety disorder diagnosis, and even if you don't, many others will experience symptoms. Medication is a big thing and can be really tough for students to get on the right regimen or to know if it is. So I think an undercurrent of all of this is going to be trusting our child, trusting our student. Is this medication working? You know, what's different? Because sometimes like we need to switch what we're taking. And whether that's the time of day or the dosage or the actual medication, and that can cause a big shift in everything, right? So I think that's a big factor when it comes to anxiety and depression is what meds are we on, if any, and are they doing what we want or need them to do? Those who are anxious in high school, we'll talk a bit more about the breakdown of ages, but those who are anxious in high school often will become anxious college students. Because not only, you know, in high school, you've got kind of the safety net of most people are at home and they've got the parents kind of cracking the whip a little bit. Whereas in college, you're kind of on your own. And sometimes that's great, but also it makes us need to really take charge. The primary student complaint in college is anxiety. And working with like students prepping for the LSAT or executive function coaching for college students, I do see that, right? People are feeling like they're just too stressed out or they're not performing well enough. And just a few more stats, then we'll get into, well, how do we deal with this? How do we help? But it really could be considered an epidemic. There's this, my students' mental health generally, I think a lot of people put a good face on, but it's just hard. It's hard. So 1/3 of adolescents by age 18 will meet criteria for an anxiety disorder diagnosis. In 2009, 2015, there was a 30% rise in students seeking counseling appointments, which is good that people are seeking the counseling and that those are available. But you can see a lot of that was for anxiety, some for depression, some for just true stress. And then, of course, these all this can lead to suicide risk factors, which is the second cause of death among young adults. Again, anxiety and depression are the big ones. So you can see here, as far as self-reported mental health treatment or diagnoses for students, those are the big ones. They're about 40% of all of them. The panic attacks, I think, probably goes with both of those a little bit as well. And not coincidentally, those are also the two biggest impediments to academic success. So I'll leave this up on screen for a moment. But if you feel stress and you feel anxiety, right, unless it's really in that eustress good zone, it really does inhibit our ability to perform well on assignments, on tests, right, in general. And you can see here it also has gone up over the years. This is going right to left. So in 2011, it's saying that 28% of students considered stress an impediment to their success, whereas then that was up by 3% 6 years later. And anxiety increased even more. So I want to get into, and I think this is the heart of the presentation, what can we as teachers, tutors, parents, guardians, mentors, what can we do to help our students? What can we do to make them understand, that some stress is okay and inevitable, and just how to deal with it? And so language is definitely going to be huge. Just how you frame things on a day-to-day. Some people say, well, I'm anxious, and we have to kind of unpack. Does that mean that I'm anxious to the point of like I'm having kind of involuntary body movements, or I really can't focus at all on doing what I need to do? Or is this kind of a natural, oh, I've got a big test tomorrow and I'm just feeling a little bit of bubbles? So I think that's important to flesh out and going to be different for everyone and hard to understand for someone experiencing it for the first time. Are we maybe pathologizing a natural normal experience? Maybe, right? So we have to figure out, like, is this worthy of stressing out, as like layman's terms, or is this something that we should just kind of try to move past? And a discourse with a student can actually directly affect their experiences. Just got a message that someone couldn't see the slides, so I'm making sure they're working. I mentioned this, but let me go back one or two. Uh, the difference between stress and anxiety is a subtle one, but stress is normal. It's an emotional reaction to immediate or perceived actual threat. And then anxiety is more about future worry. So the threat of danger is not imminent. It's more, oh, I see this down the road, and your mind kind of does that little bit of a spiral. When students feel afraid in general, that can happen. We get those anxious feelings and we think about, well, gosh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get into this school? How can I pass this class? And those types of anxious worries can affect performance because you can't really control those things in the far future. So part of the guidance of an executive function coach, right, or a teacher or a parent, as the case may be, is how to kind of help the student say, well, what can I do now to put myself in a position for success later? And again, some stress is good, right? This little curve here, like a little, if a student goes into like an ACT or SAT, for example, and we're preparing and they're just feeling calm as a cucumber, right? Cool as a cucumber, we're fine. I'm not worried at all. I got this. That's a little bit worrisome. It's better than someone who's freaking out and just saying, oh gosh, I'm doing so poorly and I don't want to do this and I'm not going to do well. The actual middle ground is where we need to be. Eustress, good stress, which is just that feeling of, all right, adrenaline's pumping, right? This is an important test, but I've prepared. And so you do want a little bit of that going on before any sort of performance, right? I think that's something we can expect. But if we have too much stress, that's when things start to fall apart. I think stressing to students how normal it is to have stress and worry is important. So I do a lot of that, a lot of kind of like coaching of just how are we feeling about this test coming up? And like often the response is, like I'm kind of worried, or I don't feel good, I feel bad. And so kind of think about, all right, well, how can we shift that into this good level of stress where we are motivated to succeed, but don't have these self-fulfilling thoughts of potential failure. So helping students understand these stress hormones, right, cortisol or whatever we've got, um, gives us this urgency level that can be super helpful and can help you be motivated, help you be focused throughout. And then even like a low level of stress, we can apply that. So sometimes I've just got this nagging voice in my head. I've got to schedule out these sessions for the next month. And so that'll motivate me to plan ahead, right, and avoid future problems. It's okay to experience worries that maybe come up more often than you'd like, as long as they lead to productive action. And I think we'll talk about this more, but implementing self-care and calming behaviors to maintain performance. So I'm big on breaks, especially if a student has a learning difference and we have extended time. How do we build in break time so that we're not just going for hours and reaching the point of diminishing returns? So just stressing, this is an okay thing. This is normal. And then there are issues with excessive fear, right? And this is a different story completely. But if we do get to the point where we're just like panicked, the teacher hates me, I'm doing so poorly, everyone else is doing better than me, all these kind of negative thoughts, that can dramatically affect our self-trust. It can cause unhappiness. And really what it does is it disallows us to solve problems. So if we get to this level of just overwhelm, which I've seen some students get to, unfortunately, not that you can't come back from it, but you've got this big level of anxiety and stress, and it just makes us kind of shut down, right? You got to have a reset, whether that's sleep or meditation or both or something different. If you reach the level where anxiety is disrupting daily functioning in your physiological experience, heart racing, sweating, palpitations, maybe your academics are noticeably suffering, right? And you're realizing, man, I've been anxious and this is correlating. Maybe social life, we're having more social anxiety. It could be easily be both of those. And it also could be just about health and well-being, right? It can be hard to tell if we're already not getting much sleep, but if we're starting to get sick a lot or having appetite issues or really not sleeping, that could be attributed to strong enough anxiety that there's an anxiety disorder for which most people will seek medical help. Again, a lot of this is about framing and definitions. So we are not, no matter what we're working on, be it an AP exam or just working on our functioning or a test prep, it's not good to use these sweeping, I am a success or failure, right? It's what am I experiencing right now? And if it's a failure, what have I experienced maybe similar to it in the past that can help me, right? Or what can I do differently next time that will turn this into a success? It's a big, big difference to say I'm experiencing a failure than I am a failure. And on the other end, I am a success is too strong, right? Because then we get this kind of feeling of comfort. So this is what someone asked about, and luckily we're getting into it. The rest of this presentation is mainly about how to deal with anxiety if we are experiencing it. And also then we're going to talk about testing specifically, right? And how to kind of talk through that and just some things to keep in mind generally. So we talked about framing. I am a success versus I am a failure. And then shifting that to I'm experiencing success or I'm experiencing a failure. Same thing here. It's not all black and white. You don't want to, if someone asks me, for example, what is a good SAT score? It's impossible to answer because it depends on the student. It depends on where we're starting. It depends on our goal. And there isn't a right outcome, right? There's a range of outcomes. And depending on how we perform on a certain test on a certain day, that could result. But we have to reintroduce the nuance. It's not all just good or bad, black and white, yes or no. There's a lot of in between and gray area where we can have positive outcomes. So what can we do to modify extreme beliefs or maybe quell anxiety? One thing to be careful of is if you feel like you're catastrophizing or awfulizing or making mustification statements, meaning I must do this. That's setting ourselves up sometimes for disappointment. We should modify that, right? What if I don't get there? Is it really going to be the end of the world? Is it catastrophic? Even when it comes to college admissions, right? So people have their heart set on one thing, but you really do want to look at, well, a lot of people don't get into this school. And if we don't, there are a lot of other good outcomes, right? We still have our hearts set on maybe this dream school, but it's not the be all end all. So you got to be careful of these kind of really extreme statements, and we can help our children or our students or ourselves modify that. So be more gentle with yourself. And a lot of people these days are, I think, very obsessed with control. What parts of our high school career and college admissions outlook can we control? But that's not what we need to do. We want to move from control towards trust. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in as much layman's terms as I can. If we try to control every aspect of our, let's say, for example, academic career, what we are doing is we're having this, generally what comes from is this future fear of failure or future fear that I won't achieve my goals. So what people try to do then is they try to say, okay, what can I do to pull every little minute aspect of my daily life and control that to the point where I'm going to get the outcome I desire. It sounds great, but as humans, it's impossible. You can't do it. And so instead, what we want to do is develop our current ability to solve problems. We can't anticipate everything that will come up. So this is again where instead of thinking of these future worries, which can make us anxious, we want to think about, all right, what's happening this week that I can do to help future me? Right. And it's a little bit more trust. It's a little bit more kind of just feeling of future me isn't going to face the same problems I'm facing now. right? And so it's really using the present. The biggest thing that I've used in sessions is humor. It's always a helpful thing when we're taking a break or just throughout. Most human way to decrease stress, and laughter will always do it. And so second half of today is about testing. This is relevant to those of you in school just coming up with, like a lot of people had finals this past week, AP exams in May, and then just, each week people have a US history test or what have you. So we're going to talk about what are the symptoms of test anxiety, and then again, how can we deal with that? Most students who suffer from test anxiety procrastinate, so they will wait till the last day or two to study. But ironically, they spend more time preparing. So like 10 hours the day before, rather than 2 hours for 3 days before. The problem is a lot of that time will not be spent on relevant tasks. So if you are thinking, if you have test anxiety, you're much more likely to kind of work for 20 minutes and then just kind of go somewhere else. Sometimes that's because of low sense of self-confidence, and other times it's just distraction. But of course, you'll see those people who have test anxiety often perform at a lower level on tests and standardized tests. And it often just is exhibited as low motivation, which is not usually what's actually happening. It's usually low self-confidence coming from negative self-evaluation and difficulty concentrating. Part of this is, how do we not perceive the test as a threat? So threat versus opportunity is a tough thing to kind of shift. But let's say we have a C in a class and the test is coming up. Instead of fearing, ugh, what if I drop down to an F? It's what can I do to get to a B? It's a minor thing, but I think that can shift people's anxiety's response, and we can change our assessment to do that. Right? So don't make it bigger than it is. And I know I got a comment that some of our participants are students, and so if this is a little bit too, this part's a little bit too high level, I apologize. Where anxiety comes from is the amygdala or amygdala. And this is what actually gives us the release of stress hormones like cortisol, which you mentioned, epinephrine, norepinephrine. And so when you see like fight or flight, right, the automatic nervous system is running. This is how we respond to threats. And so this is physically what's happening. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But again, this is what happens if we're anxious, right? So the whole body is getting ready. We're fired up, hyper arousal. And then the prefrontal cortex is the brake to this. So ideally, if our amygdala is an alarm system, but then we realize, oh, everything's okay, right? Oh my gosh, I thought that was a threat, but I'm okay. Then the prefrontal cortex hits the brake, that quiets our anxiety and our fear. So we got to think about how can we engage the prefrontal cortex rather than the fight or flight. The reason is, if you have just overflow of stress hormones, which you'll get from the amygdala and that fight or flight feeling, right away, it's like if that happens on a test, our working memory, what you can hold in your brain at one time, goes down. And of course, as a result, test scores usually suffer, right? We have that feeling of reading a paragraph and thinking, oh crap, what did I just read? And that happens to the best of us. The question then is, what do we do with that, right? Sometimes the answer is just move on. Maybe we have time to reread it, but usually that's not the best move, right? So thinking about like, first off, what is happening and why do I feel this way? And then let's think about how do we quell that. And aside from regular anxiety, testing anxiety, of course, is a big thing. When I taught in Georgia, they had the milestones, and many states have those tests, the testing requirements. people have to take the PSAT, standardized tests are still a big thing, and just teachers using tests for grades and benchmarks. So it's just constant testing. This is a higher number now, but probably 70% of high school students reported suffering from test anxiety at least some of the time, and as many as a quarter said almost always feeling anxious, test anxiety. So very prevalent, especially in later grades. Again, I work mostly with like sophomores, juniors, some seniors in high school. And if elementary students are going to be more likely to show like the physical signs, whereas the older students will actually experience the behavioral and effects associated. So like actual lower scores and feeling a bit more during the test, right? They know it. As far as who tends to experience more test anxiety, definitely students with disabilities. And then also students who are in kind of gifted high level honors classes. There's a lot of trying to keep up with fellow students and feeling unworthy or less than. So we do see a lot of anxiety just in those high academic tracks. Girls are also definitely more likely to experience anxiety than boys around this age, especially in elementary, middle, high school. I've noticed this with my students where a lot of the male students are more confident, sometimes rightfully so, sometimes not, about asking questions or about making mistakes, which is good. And then a lot of female students are less confident, don't want to make a mistake, or a bit fearful of that. And so building that confidence and making it a safe place to make mistakes can be a big difference maker. You can also pick up on anxiety of others. I see this with PSAT, since it's one of those tests taken in school with peers. So you got to make sure, is this really something I need to take on? Is this actually my anxiety, or is this something that I can kind of not feel? So on our end, what can we do for our kids? And this comes back to framing it and how the discourse is so important. Some parents understandably struggle with watching their kids struggle. And so we jump in too quickly. This happens with mothers of sons a good amount in my experience. Just to minimize frustration or suffering, it's a natural instinct. The problem occurs if you step over the line of nurturing and then don't allow the kid to develop key life skills, right? How would they sort through this on their own, which they will have to do eventually? So that anxiety about failure or just feeling the, I guess, secondhand anxiety for your child, it's a thing that happens, right? That we'd like to avoid if at all possible. So some research here about parental response to failure, meaning, okay, I got a bad grade on a test. And of course, there's different circumstances, right? Like, is this unusual? Is this a new thing? But like, how do we react to failure? Certain parents believe that setbacks are harmful, but that actually can often foster a fixed mindset. So a setback here and there, we can't be perfectionists always. So, a setback that we learn from, I mean, in a tutoring session, I want to make mistakes because we will learn the most from them. If the child sees anxiety or concern on the parent's face, that alone, even without verbal feedback, can lead a child to believe that setbacks reflect badly on their ability. I'm worse, I'm less than because of this. It's really hard to avoid that internally. And then again, we don't want to view failure as debilitating or even bad necessarily, because then that teaches children to fear failure, avoid it at all costs, when again, sometimes failure is part of the growth process. So you don't want to fear failure, you want to strive for success. Minor difference in terminology, but a really big important thing. Much better than using failure as a mistake or something that makes us wrong or bad is let's use it as a teaching tool. This is really, I think, where the gold is. Talking through it, trusting the student. What mistake did you make, and what did it teach you? What would you do differently next time? That's pure gold. If this is something you really want, then it's something you really have to work for, right? Which is like frustrating to hear in a way from mom or dad, but fair and honest, right? And that's what you want: constructive feedback, honest feedback. Don't lay it all out for them, but do use mistakes and failure as some sort of tool for teaching, for improvement. It's all about mindset. Some things that just may confound, may add things to the mix. If students have a little bit of a slower processing speed. And I know from experience, unfortunately, that not all 504 plans or IEPs are good enough or enforced well enough. So that can be an issue. Same with other learning differences like dyslexia or ADHD or just any of those. And sometimes students just have skill deficits. Maybe they lost a year in school, right? Or just English as a second language. So there can be different things that can compound anxiety. And so if it's a learning difference, maybe part of that is I got to sit up front, right? Think about what has worked for you and what hasn't worked for you in the past. So what can we do? There's just not an exhaustive list by any means, but for a student who is anxious, education is number one, right? What is it? What am I feeling? Is it true anxiety? Or am I just feeling kind of some stress, and understanding really deeply what we're feeling? Giving a person mastery experiences, which is to say showing them success, and even if it's a small thing. So I'm struggling with basic algebra. Well, if we can master factoring, simple factoring or foiling, or just one basic part of algebra, that'll make a student feel really good and give them motivation and encouragement to do the next topic. Meditation, I mean, it's something I do. I don't have many high school students who will, but certainly can help people, even if it's just to stay off screen for 10, 15, 20 minutes and do breathing. Um, Mindfulness practice, I think, goes with that as well. So making sure that we're being grateful and that we are thinking about the way we are thinking. And then writing about anxiety is a big one. It can be a little bit counterintuitive, but if we draw attention to negative information, that usually makes it more salient in memory, meaning you're more likely to be able to correct it the next time. So if you write, I'm so nervous about messing up tomorrow, right? I'm picturing on the test, I'm doing the test and I get stuck looking around, everyone else is doing it. The teacher's like looking at me like I'm silly. And just writing that down gives you greater self-awareness, metacognition, which is thinking about the way we think and understanding the way that you yourself think. And then that's going to lead to better performance. So it's hard to convince yourself to do it, but for sure, if you are anxious about something, just writing about it is a huge, huge tactic that will help. And again, like understanding that mistakes are okay, it's a safe place to make mistakes, and that also not every challenge is a threat. So make sure that we know, hey, um, this test, it is okay if you feel a little bit or even a lot nervous about it. It is okay if you start to even feel like sweaty or like heart racing. Before the test, that's okay. During the test, that's okay. As long as it's not overboard. If you have a little bit of that, that can improve your performance and is in fact good. Just for a student to know that, just to know that alone can help. So this challenge is not a threat, and what I'm feeling is not necessarily bad. It can help me. And we talked about comparison culture, but we'd rather set benchmarks and compare within oneself. So don't compare yourself to your friends or the people next to you, right? Just focus on your own journey, your own process, right? We get a test score for a baseline, take it again in a month and see if we've improved and in what areas. right? And look at just where do I need to focus? Where did I start? Where's my end goal? So self-focused competition. Competitive nature is good, but try to keep it internal. And then just a few other tactics, techniques we can use, then we'll open up to questions. Mastery experiences are success experiences and showing that a student, hey, maybe I like help lay the framework, but as a tutor or a teacher or a coach, you're not trying to be a guru, you're trying to give them the tools, right? So again, maybe it's just dribbling a basketball, right? And this person's frustrated, they can't do it. So, okay, well, let's try bouncing it once. Did you do that and catch it? Perfect. Now let's try twice. Look, you did that and you did it all on your own without help from me. So that works for any aspect of academics or testing. Uh, Even if it's just, here's an example question, can you narrow it down to 3 choices rather than 4? Right? Then you're giving yourself a better chance and you show them that they are actually improving their own outlook. And we can borrow from areas we succeed in and really feel good about. So maybe this is a lacrosse star who really is able to maintain concentration, not be anxious during lacrosse games. How does she do it? She always goes for a run before games. So then the natural thought is maybe we can borrow that. And maybe for the ACT, we'll do a jog and that might help maintain concentration and lessen anxiety. So we're borrowing from this lacrosse strength domain where our self-regulation and our feelings are strong, and we're filling the less full vessel and giving ourselves more efficacy in the testing world. So you're taking and borrowing from something you feel good at. That's really helpful. And then another thing that can help reduce anxiety, which make people feel more efficient and effective, is cognitive rehearsal. So putting yourself in the situation and running through it. That could be writing, or it could be practicing a speech in front of a mirror or in front of a pet or friend or parent. And this is, again, one that I'm pretty big on, which is I hear a lot of students say, I'm bad at math or I'm bad at test taking. And we want to reframe that immediately. You're not bad at test taking. There's got to be a good test experience that you've had. Let's think about what happened there. Why do you say you're bad? What makes you feel like you are bad at that? That is the biggest key to helping reduce anxiety and to help regulate your own emotions. So whenever you hear this negative self-talk, you do want to try to correct that as much as possible because it goes with that fear of failure too. That inner dialogue, if you hear a lot of self-criticism or you know that your child or your student does, the first thing is to notice that and just say, huh, that's interesting. Right? So part of the mindfulness techniques or meditation is when that happens, you just kind of want to acknowledge it and think, oh man, I'm being judgy. I'm thinking bad thoughts. I'm doubting myself. I'm being critical. So that's one way you can kind of address it. Just saying, oh man, I shouldn't do that. Or you can actually have this inner monologue and your higher self say, hey, that's not very nice, critic. Why don't you be nicer about this? And you can have this inner dialogue. It can seem silly to people, but like this is mindfulness techniques, and they really, really work from experience. Our goal is to prime our inner coach. A tutor, a teacher, a parent can help do that. And it's not just to initiate or complete, but to support you all the way through the exercise. Part of executive function coaching is determining, are we struggling initiating a task, persisting with it, or completing it, or maybe some level of all of it. So finally, what we need to do is shift inner dialogue to more supportive first person you statements. I really like we statements, but I think you is helpful in these instances. So I'd say we can do this. We've prepared. We've got this. I think it's just as effective. But I also think telling a student, I've seen what you can do. I know you've got this, right? That kind of feeling of, oh, shoot, yeah, this person has it. And this person looking at me thinks I have it. right? So that can help you be more compassionate, be more kind to yourself. And honestly, it boosts results. We talk about naming and taming the anxiety monster. So if you are someone who feels anxiety and you know this is something that just plagues you, one way we can do it is personify it, right? Give it a name, Harold or Worry Beast, and think, again, create some distance. So this isn't me. I'm not my thoughts, right? It's like, ugh, figures, you're going to show up. That's again where we try to engage that higher self to say, well, hey, don't do that. Or can we talk about why you're doing this? Something that I learned, one tactic was thinking about this, this stress monster or worry beast, and trying to kind of engage and thinking, well, what is the worry beast really afraid of? Are they really mean to you? But usually, if you think about it, the worry beast wants the best for you, right? And they're thinking, this is what we need to work on because, like, I'm worried that this will happen. So if you can understand, this is part of me, but it's not all of me. And you create a bit of distance, that gives us a bit of control over that anxiety to just say, wait a second, I don't know if I really feel this way. Let's flesh it out. Breathing comes into play with this, through your nose, in through your nose, out through your mouth. They're also, so if I've seen people, not students, but people have vasovagal responses, which involves the vagus nerve. So it calms it controls the nervous system. There are these diaphragm breaths, so these deep breaths you can take from the heart of the stomach, from the diaphragm, that can stimulate the vagus nerve in a good way, which can help calm you down. The goal would be lower your blood pressure, lower your heart rate, and if you're feeling like kind of anxious palpitations or anything else, it will decrease those. So even if it's just taking 10 seconds during a test, right? Especially for a student with extra time, we need to take that time to just, maybe it's rolling your neck, think about what works for you. And most students are going to be different, right? So just figure out what works and what doesn't. But deep breathing makes a difference. It's also, again, like putting down the technology and just kind of focusing on the present for a moment. Here's how you can teach your student or yourself to breathe deeply and consciously. So you go in like that, and you count to 4. So in 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's hold 1, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's really slow. In, hold, and slow. And some people say exhale to like a count of 8. You can really do a slow exhale if you like that better. Practice it 1 minute at a time, so don't overdo it, but then do it multiple times per day. And then maybe you're more likely to be able to access that technique on test day or when anxiety hits you. So our goal is really, it's complicated, right? It is all kind of high level because anxiety is complex. And all we can really do is think about what tools do I have at my disposal. Mindfulness meditation. So for example, the Calm app is a fairly low priced app, and there's other meditation apps that students can use. And what it does is it teaches you to appreciate the present, right? Just what am I seeing and hearing and feeling and smelling right now? And eliminating judgment, gentle kindness, accepting attitude. That kind of thing can make a huge difference for someone, especially like an adolescent who has a lot of negative self-talk and is always kind of comparing themselves to others. So just this taking 5-10 minutes a day to have mindfulness, waking up and practicing gratitude. These are things that really I didn't, and most people don't learn about until they're older. But if I had known about it in high school, I think it would have helped a lot. being out in nature, even looking at pictures of nature is better than looking at just, TV or phone. But exercise is a big one. Natural reliever of anxiety. 30 minutes of exercise 3 to 5 times a week can provide significant relief. You're going to get the endorphins, dopamine, serotonin that can help with depression and can just lift your mood generally. I think most of us know from experience that just going outside on a nice day can be big, getting some sunshine, and then it suppresses the release of the stress hormone cortisol. Exercise when we can, getting a little bit of movement always good. And we just got a few slides left and we'll open it up to questions. Sleep is the key. Even in law school, I would not pull an all-nighter. I would stay up until like 1 a.m., crash for a few hours and wake up. And I maintained that that was better because I had a few hours of sleep under my belt. And at 1 a.m., I wasn't doing anything good anymore. It wasn't helping. Try to minimize caffeine. I know a lot of my students drink coffee, which is crazy in high school, but that's what it is these days. Trying to shut off digital stimulation an hour or two before sleeping, rare, but good. And what can we do instead? Take a bath, play nice music, right? So maybe the phone's on the other side of the room. We have music, read a book, or just do some of those mindfulness exercises, or write about your day, journal, or what you're anxious about can be helpful too. Again, nature, even it's shown that just looking at pictures of nature for 10 minutes can help people calm their anxiety. Teenagers who heard water fountain sound at the dentist's office experience reductions in anxiety levels. They're probably an increase in having to go to the bathroom. That's usually my experience. I pull weeds and get dirt under my fingernails to regulate my anxiety. So I don't do that, but this is Jed Applerouth's presentation. And so he gardens. And my father-in-law is like that too. Loves the feeling of just kind of planting and earth under his fingers. So think about where your happy place is and try to get there as much as you can. Life is short. We talked about analog connections versus digital. So making sure that you are, as much as you can, forging and maintaining relationships, right? Even if that's just siblings or cousins or family or friends or all of the above. Just social interaction alone can reduce anxiety and fear. Part of that is through oxytocin, which actually does show promise in treating anxiety disorders because it makes that fight or flight amygdala less reactive to stressors. So what else can we do? Clenching and unclenching fists. Sometimes that's good for people, or like a stress ball or hacky sack or something. I've got a few things here. Forced yawning. Be careful because you don't want to fall asleep. And then progressive tensing and relaxing. These are all tactics for holistic relaxation. I've had students who use muscle activation. So like this is kind of like the progressive tensing and relaxing. So you tense it as hard as possible for 10 seconds and then release and let it rest. You do this from right foot, left foot, all the way up the body. And part of that just helps you do a body scan and just kind of stay in the present. Something I need to work on is posture. The posture affects anxiety. An anxious posture, which I guess could be a bunch of things, right? Hands crossed, nail biting, hands on face. Sometimes that can actually signal to the brain that you're anxious, and then you've got the brain activity changing. And the last two things, so tapping is something that I had a therapist teach me once, and I've had students who already do this. It is really just literally tapping. I'll show you a few parts of the body you can do it, but it's mostly on the face. And the goal is to decrease anxiety and progressively relax your muscles. It's a distractor. So this is something that if you have test anxiety, this could be a thing for you, right? So maybe it's just some quick taps there, like see if this works. And here, right, on the chest, there's a couple as well. And for different people, different ones are more helpful. but this is something you can try, as is havening, which you can do face havening, palm havening, arm havening. Sometimes this is just, again, like giving yourself this feeling of security and calm, right? So think about if it works for you, try it, and it's not one size fits all. I have here these little stress balls. So like you can just kind of rotate them around. If you're feeling stressed, you rotate them around your hand. So centering objects can be really good too, right? A stone or anything like some sort of pendant or tablet. All right. I think I've kept you long enough, so I want to open up for questions. The one thing I want to make sure you guys know about is on test day. So if we've got test anxiety, you do not want to try anything new. So any techniques you're trying to practice, make sure you do that. Like practice on your own, use tests as close to the real one as possible, and plan in advance. So know what's on the test. Don't be surprised, and try out your tapping or your breathing or any mechanisms early on to see if they're going to work. Don't let test day be the first time. So our services, again, are academic coaching in school, executive functioning coaching, which is usually 30-minute sessions once or twice a week, and then test prep, which is more like an hour or 90-minute sessions for 10 or so weeks leading up to an official test or two. And then the big thing coming up is AP exam prep. I'm going to put this link in the chat. No, you can see it there. So it's the applerouth.com/AP. And I'm going to show you the offerings we have, because this year I think it's a lot more impressive than it has been. We've got workshops. You can see those start in February, so in a couple of weeks. And that's for any of these AP classes: literature, chem, history, calculus, and so on. We also offer practice tests for each of these, and then one-on-one tutoring if you want that in addition to or instead of the workshops. And again, that's at applerouth.com/AP. We have reached the end of our presentation. Hope it was helpful, and let's just open it up for questions. Anything you've got, throw them at me. And if you feel content, feel free to call it a night, and I appreciate you joining. So first question is, if we feel self-doubt in the college application cycle and don't do much work for it, are those related? I mean, the short answer is probably yes, because a lot of times when we're feeling self-doubt, um, it results in a lack of motivation. So like for me, I'm best at the things I'm good at. But if I'm feeling like, ugh, I'm worried I might not get into this school, or maybe I'm worried about a certain aspect of my college application, or maybe we're just anxious about writing the personal statement or that it'll be good enough. I definitely think that putting in time to think about what is it that I'm afraid of, or what is it that is holding me back, will probably unlock your ability to both do more work and feel less self-doubt and more self-confidence. So I think your instinct that probably because you haven't put in much work, you're a little bit more doubtful is correct. And I think they'll go hand in hand. So that's the good news, is the more you start thinking about it, there will be certain spikes in stress, but at the same time, knowing more about what you're doing and what you need can only help. That's a good question. So next question is, do I have a link that offers guidance on setting up a study guide like Khan Academy? Um, it depends on what we're setting up for. So like, I think that's too tough to say for like one size fits all. But the general rule for like a class, let's say it's just AP US history class. When you're setting up a study guide, you need to first consult the syllabus and make sure that you know what's going to be on the test. Is it multiple choice? Is it like, are there some free response? Is it timed? And then it's so different for each class and each person that I would say, like, if you're really interested in that, think about working with an executive function coach, because they can help you think about, like, all right, here's where I'm falling short on my pre-calc class. And so this is how I need to study for that. But that might be totally different than how you need to study for lit, for example. So yeah, there's no specific link for creating a study guide, but I think a lot of it just comes from experience, right? Again, it's different for everyone. All right, last question, since we're at 9 p.m. If you're just nervous about not getting into a college, that is a natural feeling. And so what you should think about is just, what can I control? Because you can't control the final decision, right? What you can control is, hey, I'm going to do my best on this. I'm going to make sure this college admissions office knows I'm interested. I'm going to get, as good grades as possible. I'm going to try hard on my test scores, right? All you can control is what you can control. And so if you're nervous about college apps because I just don't know if I'm going to get in, you need to then think, okay, what are my schools that I'm pretty confident on getting in? Get me a couple reaches, and then ones that are right in your wheelhouse, right? So I think it's more about, don't think about the result, but the process instead. I really appreciate you guys joining and hope it was helpful. Have a great rest of your night and week.